there is going to be a point, believe it or not, when it gets better. When you and part of it getting better is often your understanding of how you might deal with it. Because probably the most frustrating thing when you're younger is not having the words, not having the understanding, not understanding um, how to basically negotiate these things. And I think that's something that you learn over time,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
That'll eventually come.
yeah, and I think, with that and an individual like yourself who, had to navigate that and my question of thinking about like how someone else at an adolescent age, might not have the words or, know what
Yeah.
to do or exactly understand what resources or things that they can do to address how they feel and what they've experienced. And I think I think obviously I do agree with you, and I can't speak for your experience of or that of other African Americans, and I try my best to acknowledge that. Um, and I knew this interview itself was going to be a pretty a sensitive topic, and I sometimes I myself have to think about, okay, how do I conduct myself in a way where not only am I being professional, but also where I'm being mindful of someone else's feelings or try to have that sense of empathy in the fact that like I can't really fit into those shoes, but and I do find that like challenging at times, but I think I thought it would be a positive and a good idea to have a conversation with you, with someone who has so much knowledge and insight into these kinds of things, and obviously just your academic studies, your things you've written, published, novels that you have. So and I find it so I find it very troubling too how, someone who may be at the age of say, 15 and, so recently there was a girl, about 9 years old who was, she was, she had a bottle of spray that had some sort of vinegar and it was to kill a certain type of invasive moth.
Yeah, she was trying to do a science project.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
she was trying to do a science project, and I wish I remembered her name, but, she was doing a science project and collecting samples of it, and, a downtown neighbor ended up calling the police on her, and, because of the incident, which, it did gain some national attention, she was, commemorated and awarded at the Yale Peabody Museum.
Yeah,
So
that was great. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that was a great reaction to that. I think when something like that happens, because if you're a young person, you're likely just going to internalize it. You're going to wonder is something wrong with you, so forth. I think it was great that, it says a lot when the larger community, in this sense, people, especially she respects as scientists, come
mhm,
forward and say, no, that was wrong. And what you're
yeah,
doing was great. I think that's the kind of, when I said all hands on deck, that's what I mean, right? And
right,
where everyone sees this as everyone like I think one of the problems I forgot who said this once is that um, too many Americans think that racism is the problem of people of color when it's actually all our problems, right?
mhm.
It's everyone's problem, and so it's everyone should be working in a way to fix it. And I thought that was a terrible thing that happened, but I thought it was a great response.
Right, I do
Um,
too.
yeah,
It's, she may never forget that one incident, being
yeah,
approached by the police and thinking about the neighbor who called the police. But, an even bigger thing coming from that is, you were honored at Yale and, your sample
yeah.
is going to be in display for years and decades to come. I
Hopefully, it
guess,
spurs her to be a scientist, which is what she wants to be, right? Yeah.
right, exactly.
Rather than, uh, something like this perhaps making her think, I don't ever want to, try to be a scientist again. So hopefully it
Mhm.
had the opposite reaction
Right,
there.
exactly. And I think, she'll probably have a pretty positive,
Yeah.
relationship with Yale
Yes.
going forward.
Yeah.
So, um, and then, I one last thing I think about with that, and thinking about like, how we address, giving youth like her and other individuals that hope and aspiration. Um, I guess one little side question I have too, before we end this is, do you think it is also possible that there can be black on black violence? Because I remember there was an
Mm.
incident not too long ago where a
Hmm.
group of African American officers um, beat another black man in the streets,
Yeah.
and then who was the religious representative? He went to he has a mustache and his hair is very long. He's
I
Reverend
can't remember.
Al Sharpton.
Al Sharpton. Yeah.
Yeah, so he spoke on that and said, something I remember him saying that, I think was very striking was, what these officers did is, a disgrace to the community and, that was, feeding into the narrative of police brutality from,
Hmm.
you know, own their own members of the community. So,
Yeah.
what do you think of that thought?
I mean, there are so many complex things there. There was a rap artist named Karis One.
Mhm.
If you ever heard of him, and back in the 1990s, he had a song called Black Cop. And it was about a long-standing issue in the black community of black police officers at times internalizing some of the worst aspects of the police system and turning it back onto the very communities from which they came from, right? And so this isn't anything new. There are a lot of people tell you that their experiences at times black cops can be just as bad as others, and then but yet at the same time, having a diversity within police is extremely important, right? And so I always say we can't let. There are those policemen who see themselves as much more aligned to whatever the negative aspects of police culture than they do to what should be the positive aspects of police culture. In protecting the community, serving and protecting, and understanding they serve and protect the community they're in. They're
Yeah,
not,
exactly.
occupying forces who are attempting to fight the community, right? And
Right.
it seemed these individual officers seem to have that ideology instead of what they should have. But I think I heard someone else say like we should not be surprised that officers of color can do this because they go through the same training and they take the same internalization society as everyone else, right? If they're like I always say, like there's nothing magical that can shield a black person from anti-blackness, right? There's nothing that stops them from picking up those same ideologies. Them being black does not stop you from doing so. You can pick up some of the same and start believing some of the same stereotypes of black people and treat them the same way based on that, right? And so I think that was what was going on there. And I'm glad there were black policemen who stood up and denounced it, right? And there are orders of black police who tried to find ways to negotiate these things with the black community. And so, I've had both positive and negative. Luckily, more positive with black police officers than negative, but I've had my own share.
Right.
But as far as the term black on black violence gets problematic. When I was growing up, it was like a big term in the 90s. Like everybody was like on black violence. And the problem with the term is that it does what some sociologists call pathologizing blackness. Most violent crime is intra-racial. And so there is white on white violence. There is Asian on Asian violence. Even more discreetly in communities, there may be Chinese on Chinese violence or Vietnamese on Vietnamese violence or Albanian on Albanian violence because most violence takes place between people who know each other. Most violence is not random, right? It's between people who have some kind of connection, familial or friendship. And so people, I think, balked at the term black on black violence and it's fallen out disarray because there's nothing that, of course, black people could commit violence against black people, just like anyone could commit violence against whatever social group they're in because they're closer together. But
Right.
people created this separate term for to describe this black violence, and that was seen as problematic. And so I think the term has fallen by the wayside because otherwise we'd be like, well, there was like even if I would say like, oh, there was white on white violence, people would be like, that sounds weird. I've never heard that before
Yeah.
because it's not pathologized that way. And so, but yes, can violence be committed? Certainly. Again,
Mhm.
most violence is intraracial and intragroup.
Mhm. Well, yeah, that's very good insight. I never kind of thought of like, what you mentioned about pathologizing it and how that
Mhm.
internalization, can fall into people just in and
Yeah.
of itself, and kind of getting sucked into what maybe in my mind I think of as like a system. So, like I said, thank you again for this.
Mhm.
This was great.
And
I
you did a
hope
good
this.
job on the questions. I think you had a great balance of professionalism and empathy. Well done.
Yeah,
Good
thank you.
questions, by the way. Good
Yeah,
thought-provoking questions.
yeah, thank you. I did put some time into, making sure these were intriguing. I didn't want just, one sentence questions. I wanted to,
Right.
address Mr. Kraft's novel as best as I could, but I think it's important to unpack those conversations further so that, not only I can understand, where you're coming from and where, a larger community may come from, but also, how I can, address that in a positive way on my end and, make my own personal impact. And I think
Right.
doing this project and getting your insight so that I can, see it from your perspective and think about others' perspectives is very helpful. So thank you again. Like I
Yeah.
said, this was great.
I hope it was very helpful. Hope it's useful
Yeah,
for you.
yeah, it was awesome. So yeah, I think I clicked record on this one as well. So I will stop that.